So tonight's going to be more reflective. Uh, I want to read something that I wrote 8 years ago. Chris Fedgetter died January 25th. Some of you may not know Chris, but he was a former member of this church family, became a lawyer, was working in Washington, D.C., and died, I think, by a heart attack.
Mhm.
And
Shoveling snow.
shoveling snow.
Mhm.
And his mother requested Dale to come down to Washington, D.C. to do the memorial service. Did I get that correct, Dale?
Yeah.
Somebody did.
Somebody requested, but you went.
You
I
went.
went.
Okay. And when Dale has a habit, besides asking Morgan Prophet Davis to speak, he'll lean on me every once in a while. So I told him I would take that Sunday so he could go. And this was my talk that morning, and I thought this would be a nice way to begin tonight. And then we'll go to the reflections. I call it death. Sometimes we just don't know. This past Tuesday morning, I had a dream. In my dream, I was instructed by someone that I had 4 days left to live. I remember feeling sad. I began thinking of all of the people in my life, from church, from my family, my colleagues at Stanford Hospital, and from my storytelling community. In my dream, I went into action. After all, what does one do with 4 days left to live? In my dream, I remember writing down all the names of people I wanted to write and say goodbye to share with them what they meant to me. And so I began writing the letters. The days passed, and then I remember panicking. I wasn't going to complete all the letters. Time was running out. Then something happened. Whoever it was gave me 7 more days to live to complete the letters. The relief I felt was immediate. I had more time to say goodbye, and then I woke up. I noticed that my eyes were wet, tears were streaking down my face, and I've been dealing with that dream all week. But why share this dream? Is this some sort of narcissistic undertaking on my part? Is this intended to be the type of talk in which you'll leave feeling sad when you leave this building this morning? I hope not, because in a deep sense, I am comforted by my dream. Whenever I deal with dreams, I think of Joseph in Genesis chapter 37. Joseph shared with his brothers how their sheaves or bundles of grain would bow down to his sheaf. He shared another dream where sun, moon, and 11 stars would bow down to him. A story that not only illuminates the phenomenon of sibling rivalry, but also foreshadowing God's love and God's care for his people. Were it not for Reuben, the oldest brother, Joseph would have died. Instead, Joseph was sold as a slave and eventually ends up as a child of the Pharaoh. Years later, those same brothers meet Joseph as Pharaoh's second in command, but the brothers did not recognize him. They reconnect. He whom they thought gone, maybe even dead, was indeed alive. It reminds me just a little of the disciples meeting Jesus later. 11 disciples surprised at Jesus' having been resurrected. And Jacob, now named Israel, Jacob's spirit was revived. Jacob's son, Joseph, was alive. Sometimes we just don't know. Consider Stephen, one of the 7 chosen in the book of Acts, chapter 6 and 7. Stephen was a gifted communicator proclaiming God's word. When Stephen was placed on trial by the religious leaders, it reads that his face was like the face of an angel. I wonder if Stephen preached if he was aware of the danger he was in. Was he aware of impending death? Yet even as he was being stoned, Stephen's prayer was for God not to hold this sin against his murderers. And like I've heard so many times at Stanford Hospital, it says that Stephen fell asleep. And at Stephen's feet, provoking the crowd, was a man named Saul. Saul, known as a major opponent of anyone who believes in Jesus, would later meet Jesus himself and become, some would say, Jesus's most articulate spokesperson. Sometimes we just don't know. As some of you know, Dale did Chris Fetgatter's funeral yesterday in Washington, D.C. In good health, at 40 years old, Chris and his wife, Kathy, shoveled snow Saturday. They walked inside, and Chris went to the bathroom. Kathy heard a thud, and Chris was gone. I don't have any answer for Kathy. I don't have any answers for the mother who lost her 3 children and 2 parents 4 Christmases ago in Stanford. I don't have any answers for a 100-year-old mother losing her 78-year-old son or vice versa. But still, I am heartened. I'm heartened that God was watching over the Israelites when they did not know it. I'm heartened by a nascent group of believers witnessing the death of their friend Stephen at the hands of Saul and others. And they had no idea that the man named Saul would become known as the Apostle Paul. And I'm heartened that when your time comes, and mine, that God is in control. Because if there's one thing I do know, it is this: sometimes you just don't know. So we're going to start off today. You got a copy? Okay. We're going to start off today just by any thoughts regarding the reflection from 8 years ago. And then the other question is, how have you responded to loved ones or friends who have died in your past?
The first question again?
Any thoughts regarding the reflection that I just read about Chris
Okay.
Fetgatter?
You have powerful dreams.
Very specific dreams.
I have an active dream life, and sometimes they come, some of which you're never gonna know.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. But I think this one had to do with the fact that Dale went down, the idea of a young man losing his life, the idea of a woman with 2 kids losing the love of her life, the idea of a mother, Sue Ellen, who lost her son, and how many people were impacted. So I think it was with me. It was with me.
And then your refrain was that we just don't know. Which is true, but it's highly satisfying.
Right.
Yeah.
At the moment, at the time, at some distance, you begin to go, I just don't know. But it's not a very satisfying answer at the start. We all keep looking to make sense of things that are not necessarily to be made sense of.
And I had forgotten that I had mentioned the woman who lost her 3 kids and 2 grandparents, and sat with her for an hour and a half saying, my children are dead. And I couldn't answer. And her eyes were locked on me for an hour and a half. And that was exhausting because I couldn't get, even if I had the answer, and I pretty much knew the answer, but I wasn't authorized to say anything. And yet I still had to be with her and her boyfriend. His name is, it's so funny. Her name's Madonna Badger, And today, just calling this, his name was Joe Borsina, Borcina. Have no idea where that came.
Laconia,
Yes, sir, Art.
this is Art, and I just in terms of the I don't know, and of course it's a good question, and then of course what do you do with that question? And what I really mean by that is, sometimes you wonder, if it were your last day, what would you do? And would you be? And I'm just maybe describing my day. Would I be sitting at a desk, and I'm fooling a little bit, just pushing paper around, and so when you don't know, I suppose what you need to do is just do the best you can with the moments that you have. And I think about, I remember there was a class, and I'm stretching a little bit, and so my facts or my recall is poor. But whether it was a Franciscan monk who worked in the kitchen washing dishes every day, but it was the greatest days of his life because as he was caring for his remedial task, he was still enjoying his life. And so I think when you don't know, that's one thing, but then you have to stay within bounds. You can't live as if this is your last day. And I just offer that as a thought because we don't know, I'm sorry to hear about this gentleman, Chris, and his circumstance. But I think you go through life not knowing and just accepting that you don't know.
The other thing, and I thought a lot about Joanne because you juxtapose Joanne's passing. She was with her daughter. She was with her two granddaughters. She was with Nick. Both sons came home before she passed. I mean, that's completely different.
Mhm.
And even though we were expecting it, we were also, that loss is deep. Because we know that that person, as we know them, is no more.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna Al with Linda over time.
Mhm.
And we're praying, but we know what's gonna happen eventually. And then sometimes there is a Chris Fetgetter. Completely out of my mother, Debbie and Dale know my mother. I got a call from my brother, and he had to say 3 times she's gone before he even registered that mama was gone, that she was dead.
Mhm.
And that's the brain.
Mhm.
But it's not a patient, it's somebody connected to you.
Mhm.
That's the difference. Al, were you gonna say something? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I saw you do your hand.
Given what I've just been through and going through. You just don't know is a gift.
Hmm.
It was a gift for us because I was fully convinced that we were beating the cancer.
Hmm.
And the scans proved it. The tumors were gone. And it wasn't the cancer that killed her, but the thing is, her biggest nightmare was throughout the year, last year, her biggest nightmare was saying goodbye to everybody she loved.
Hmm.
She had nightmares about it. She couldn't sleep. And God never gave her the chance. She went quickly, and there was nothing else we could do. She never knew.
Hmm.
Once she went unconscious, it was over. And we all thought we had years because the scans were so great. But my point is, if we did know, I think it would have been a hell of a lot more painful.
Yeah.
For sure.
Hmm.
So in that respect, I think it's a
Mhm.
gift.
But it's interesting
Maybe
that
you're
for
right.
your family and for Linda, that's worked for her. for Judy,
Yeah.
she had, I'd say, a clear month that things were coming to an end.
So
And
she knew.
She knew,
Mhm.
and she used that time to talk about it very freely, very openly with people that she chose to talk to about. The grandkids were sitting with her. Like on a Friday night, she died on Monday morning, but Friday night they knew she was in active dying. And the grandkids were able to sit with her on her bed and and Lucas says it's a beautiful, very meaningful exchange that they had with their grandmother at the very end of her life. And that's what she wanted.
Mhm.
So, there's not a right or wrong about that.
No,
Different
absolutely.
people-
not. I accept
So
that for
different
sure.
people will experience it
Mhm.
very differently.
And my talk that Sunday was really specific to Chris Fetgatter.
Mhm.
It wasn't
Right.
specific to every human being,
Right.
Mhm.
you know. But I think Al's right too, that, or Debbie's right, that different people will respond differently
Mhm.
to impending loss and the loss.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and I always say that deaths are like births. They're all unique.
Mhm.
Same thing sort of happens in all of them, right?
Mhm.
It's basic thing happens. But we always tell birth stories because they're all slightly different.
Mhm.
And death stories are the same way. They're
Mhm.
all very different.
Mhm.
You know, and that's one reason why it's good to tell them too, and look at the, you know, the blessings in one situation, the
Mhm.
blessing in another situation, or whatever, or the total shock
mhm,
Mhm.
of Chris or Greg or whatever, you know, you
right.
have those, but they're all different, and one of the reasons, and they're all different too, because all the families dynamics are very different.
And some deaths destroy a family, and other deaths bring people together and
Right,
strengthen
right.
them. Mhm.
I was in a grief group after Greg died, and one of the men in there, his son had died in a drug deal gone bad,
Mhm.
and that was a whole different scenario.
Mhm.
The guy that shot him was going on trial, and, you know, but that was a whole
Mhm.
another kind of thing. Plus, he didn't get a lot of sympathy from some people because
Mhm.
his, yeah, because they're like, oh, well,
Mhm.
his son was
Which
a
is
drug dealer.
Mhm. Mhm.
But anyway.
Yeah.
They're all different,
Mhm.
and they're all deserve to be
Yeah.
heard. It's good to hear them all, is what I'm
Mhm.
trying to say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for me, when my grandmother was sick and she was losing her memories little by little, and we saw early sets of maybe Alzheimer or something, and I remember visiting her in India in emergency with him, like, you just had to go quickly, be there 3 days and come right back. And I remember she was at the point where she would not recognize any of us. In fact, she was calling my mom her sister. And I guess a month or two after we heard that she passed, and I didn't cry, and then maybe it was like 3 months or 4 months later, out of nowhere, I just started sobbing, you know, and Ashley was there, and she's like, "What happened?" And I told her, like, my grandmother, you know, and it just didn't hit me for a while when it happened. And with my grandfather, his was more sudden, and it was after my grandmother. But that was, to this day, like, I didn't feel the grief the way I felt with my grandmother, and maybe it is because I was expecting my grandmother's mother to pass, rather similar to what I was saying earlier, like, versus like happening all of a sudden. And I don't know, you know, and since then, it just got me a little bit more worried for my parents, you know, as they both turned 70 and 70 up. And I was like, man, if something were to happen to them, it will take me at least 24 to 48 hours before I can even get to them. And it was the first time when I visited this recently that I asked them for their neighbor's number in case if both of them could not respond to my messages, but so I can check on them through neighbor. And it was very real because I had never thought about even possibility of my parents dying, you know, they're always invincible. But now the reality is becoming real as they cross 70. So, yeah.
Yeah, that number 70 is really
Yeah.
big.
Yeah, right.
Oh, three score and ten.
We're getting up there.
Yeah.
Well, this goes into the second question. How have you responded to loved ones or friends who've died? I'll share with you. I'm connected with Viral because my dad died in January of 1979. And to be very honest with you, at that point, the only church that was going to heaven was the Church of Christ, and everybody else was going to hell. I don't like admitting that, but that's where I was. And what it did to me was, I didn't want my father to go to hell. And I literally just stuffed um, the grief down. And then something happened, and I was with Mike Moore, the minister, and it was a small thing, but the grief came out. And I mean, I'm crying, and Mike looks at me and he goes, Laconia, why are you crying? And I just remember looking up at him going, I'm crying for my dad. 3 years.
Mhm.
And what came out of that was, it's really not about what church you're connected with. This is really about God being greater than anybody could put restrictions on God. And all of a sudden, I gave into the fact that God was in control and not any particular religious group. And all of a sudden, I said to myself, who knows? I may see my dad again. And I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I will tell you that was freeing. And I could let Herman Albert Wilson Sr. go. And I could say his name in a way that I couldn't before because I didn't want us to be separated. And it's not about us being separated. It's about me trusting that God will do whatever God will do. What I do trust is that God knows the human heart better than anybody else. And he knows my dad's heart. Okay, that's me. Anybody else? Any other responses to loved ones or friends who've died?
Laconia, my grandmother, or not my grandmother, my mother-in-law, Rosemary's mother, Kitty Buckenter, Kitty Roy, uh, lived into her early 90s. And I don't know, beginning of July of that year, she was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of leukemia. And the doctor said, Mrs. Roy, you've got like 2 to 4 weeks left. Use them wisely. And she was fabulous. She was absolutely fabulous. It's not like she was walking around, oh, I feel so ill. She trusted her relationship with her maker. It was nothing but a nonstop celebration while she was alive. People came to visit her. Her church came and serenaded her. Her whole family came and surrounded her. I remember my last conversation with her. It was wonderful. It was the way to go. And I also know that she lives on through her legacy. And that's why death really is not final. We live on through the lives that we've touched as we've grown up and existed. And when I think about Joanne's legacy, wow, she lives on through so many powerful people. And the same thing is true of my mother-in-law. So, we all have an end, comes in different ways, but I'd like to think that there's good to come of it as well.
I'm going to go back to what Debbie said about Judy Hopper. Judy was here for her last Easter, and she said, this is my last Easter, and I wanted to spend it at the place where I know they do Easter Sunday well. And she said, that's the Stanford Church of Christ. But there was no poor me about her. She just said, I know it's coming. I'm okay. I'm going to be with God. And there was no poor me about that. She was just ready. And she went way quicker than we expected, but there was no sense of depression with her. She was going to go.
Mhm.
One of the most moving experiences. When I go, I want to have Judy's attitude. That's really what I thought.
Mhm.
I want to have Judy's spirit when my time comes, whether it's through cancer or whether I get killed somewhere else or whatever. I want to have the attitude that when I go, I'm going to be okay.
Mhm.
And that was her attitude.
Mhm.
Can we handle?
Yeah, yeah. Hand it over.
So change your thoughts, and I want you to think about Jesus's mom, Mary. What are some ways Mary could have responded to Jesus's death? This is just creative space in our own minds. How could Mary have responded? And think about how you might respond to your loved one's death.
Well, you might not hang out at the foot of the cross.
Right, right. And I had never put that together before.
A lot of the disciples didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, but she did.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were.
Mothers do that.
Mothers do that. And she'd been pondering all these things.
In our heart, all the years,
Beginning.
yeah.
She, yeah. Probably knew she had a unique son
Mhm.
Mhm.
and probably treasured him
Mhm.
all the days she had him.
Mhm.
But,
Yes,
yeah, when someone I know passes on, that I know, for instance, I've always wondered, where are they? What's it like? And if they were bad, it's not for me to judge, final judge, but I always wondered, like Hitler, what's going on there, and Mussolini and the millions they killed and, for whatever, I just always wondered, where they are, and the good people, Christians.
Yeah.
Wow, what's heaven like? Are you gonna be talking, or are you gonna associate with anything up there, Will I be talking to Dale? up there?
No. Talking to Dale.
My good friend, Eddie, I'll see you up there.
Eddie, yeah, Haskell.
well, I think Jamie does ask a good question. I think the answer that I come up with today is people spend so much time thinking about what heaven's going to be like that they neglect the heaven that's already here on earth.
Mhm. Mhm.
For me, what we're experiencing right now is heaven. To be with Kathy and her family this past week, to hear Scott's powerful eulogy, to hear Dale's spiritual reflection. I go to a little bit of dinner with storytellers afterwards, and the two things they talk about was the power of Dale's reflection and the power of Scott's eulogy.
Hmm.
And I want to say that's about as powerful a Christian witness as can ever be done.
Mhm.
It's not, I'm in somebody's face. We're just letting people know that this woman, Joanne, had an impact on all of our lives, and these people got to hear it in such a holistic way that they have to talk about it with me over dinner.
Mm.
And I'm amazed. Go ahead, Jamie.
Forget it.
What do you think it was like for Mary to witness that which she could not stop?
Remember, she had practice, Laconia.
Yeah.
But I want you to try to get into her mind, her heart. And those of you who are parents, you can do that. I can't.
Mhm.
I've never had a child. I have a sense only because of being with people in the hospital setting when they've lost a child, but I have no way of understanding it to any degree.
Well, I do think Jesus, we can see it in scriptures, but it makes sense. It's even more pronounced that he spoke with her about what was coming. And while many people would say, oh, no, that's not gonna happen. No, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, I think she took it in because she'd been hearing rumors of it all throughout his life. And I think she understood it better because we don't have any record of her kind of shooing him or shushing him about it. She wouldn't have let him talk.
You know, Debbie just made me think of something. Judy, Joanne, Linda, there's a phrase in the hospital chaplaincy we call anticipated grief. We know it's coming and we're grieving. In a sense, Mary was anticipating grief her whole life,
Yeah.
And she felt it.
and she
Right.
felt that.
Mhm.
One of the cool things that jumped out at me, and if you all don't know it, cool is my favorite word. He says, woman, behold your son. Anybody else remember the other time he used the word woman with his mother?
At the
One.
wedding.
At the wedding.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I'm not a Greek scholar, Lord knows that. But I think the same word is used. And the word woman is not it's not misogynistic. It's actually a term of endearment and respect. So, and I had never seen that together before. What he did at the wedding was the same thing he did on the cross, whether in death or whether in celebration, you can still address someone the same way. That's a powerful lesson.
Well, you
Yes,
made a
sir.
comment before about, do you think this is heaven, where we are on earth?
It can be.
It can be.
No, it can't be. How do you figure that?
You're a cynic.
How do you figure that? Oh, violence and everything you turn, there's so many.
No, there's no chips.
What?
You have complete choice over how you feel about that.
Well, still, look at it. Look around you. There's no practical way. This is heaven.
No.
Some say it's hell. I've been through hell, now I'm gonna go to heaven.
Mhm.
You know, so.
I
don't know.
I can see that. But I would also say to you that there are people who claim to be Christian and they are racist, they are misogynistic, they put down everybody around them, but they'll say, we're gonna all be together in heaven. You know what? I'm not too sure I want to be with those people. No, and I don't mean to be disparaging. What I'm just saying is we can spend so much time talking about what's up there that we neglect what's here.
Right.
And
And there's still, even though if doesn't feel like heaven every day, you can say there's still a lot of good.
yeah,
Beautiful things and
Yeah.
good people
We
and
get
wonderful
glimpses, lots of
experiences.
Good glimpses of it.
That's my word for it.
That's the word I was thinking of, was
What did you
glimpse.
A glimpses, and Eddie said
Mhm.
it's too, you know.
Mhm.
But I would say more bad than
You
good.
get glimpses.
Yeah,
It
but
depends.
It's
Look
what
at
around you,
me,
it's what
too.
around you.
Okay, say the same thing to you. Look around you.
Yeah, what I'd say is, if you read the news, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you just look around, look around this table and you see amazing
Christians,
goodness.
my brothers and sisters.
So my point is the people whose life you actually live with, you see glimpses of heaven all the time. But you're gonna hear horrific news out there, and the reason you're gonna hear horrific news is because it's news.
Yeah.
It's not the
Yeah.
way ordinary life goes, it's the way unordinary life goes.
And it's
Someone
not,
got robbed, that doesn't happen to most people.
yeah, and if we stopped and just did spend an hour, we could easily
Easy.
spend an hour talking about all the good things that we've experienced this today or this week. You know, so there's a lot of goodness that we all can take in and breathe in and be grateful for. And we,
Absolutely.
I think Bushan wanted to say something.
No, but the same thing, like, it's like human nature only where we kind of like over exaggerate like the bad things only.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's by default, we think about those like more, you know, rather than thinking about like good things.
Philippians 4:8.
Yeah.
Going
Yeah.
back to Mary, I was looking at John chapter 19, and it's interesting that it says, like, after he, says, behold our mother to the disciple, that disciple took her onto his own home.
Mhm.
And it makes me wonder if the reason behind it is because Jesus commanded his disciples to love each other the way I have loved you, but he knew that his mother will be loved the same way he would love her. Only by being with with John or whoever the disciple was, right? Because Jesus had other brothers, like
Yeah,
he didn't have to hand her over to a particular disciple. But he felt like the love that would be lacking can be somehow fulfilled by her being with someone who has seen how Jesus loves.
Mhm.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and who was at the foot of the cross too,
Yeah.
whoever that was, but yeah.
I'm gonna give you a heaven on earth story. And it's
Listen
because
up, Jamie.
I'm all ears.
it brings tears to my eyes. Marcus Pauls was assaulted. He had just bought maybe $1,000 bike. And 3 or 4 black guys jumped him, beat him up, and stole his bike. And for the next month, every black person that Marcus saw, he didn't see a black person, he saw the N-word. And that was his first thought. And Marcus comes to me one day and with tears in his eyes, and he tells me the story. And then he says, but I woke up and I realized when I was saying that about that black person, I was calling you and Eddie the N-word. And I stopped. To me, that's a heaven on earth story. Because he's in pain. I wanted to go beat the kids up.
I did too.
And they would have beat me up.
They would have.
But it's because Marcus was in relationship and he could imprint on their faces people who he loved, who looked like those people. And all of a sudden he goes, I'm wrong.
Shut that down.
And he stopped.
Mm.
Jamie, I don't know, but for me, that is as heaven on earth a story as I could come up with.
No, I understand. It's a story, right? And I can relate to that because I can tell you good
Yeah,
stories.
yeah.
No, absolutely.
But Marcus also had to make a choice.
Yeah.
And he had all of his feelings, but then he said, it's Eddie, it's Laconia. He goes, I gotta stop this. And he took himself out of a morass that he was going deeply into.
And Jesus says the same thing, do unto others that,
Yeah.
do to others as if you're doing it to me. When did we see you hungry? When did we, Lord,
Right.
when did we see you? And that's my problem with so many things going on in the world. Do you not know that's Jesus? Do you not believe what he said? When you sing the poor, that's me. When you see the immigrant, that's me. That's not some form, that's me. And we're gonna have to answer for that.
What do you mean by me?
Jesus said it's me. Jesus is saying it's me.
Oh, yeah.
Parable of the sheep and the goats.
And I think it goes especially with politics today. We demonize people who disagree with us, and we put them in a category of the other. And what Jesus would say is, love that person. And sometimes that's not easy. And it's not easy for who disagrees with us to love me sometimes. It's not about me loving them, it's also about them loving me.
Somewhere in here, it's sort of changing the angle a little bit.
That happens when I teach.
The way Jesus died. I mean, he died in such an extraordinary way. There was something about the way he died. The centurion says,
Yeah,
behold, this is the Son of God.
Yeah.
And often through history, churches have spent a lot of attention, on the way of death, and with Jesus being the model of how to die. And we probably let that slip most of the time, almost everybody. But I mean, if you're Mary watching him at the cross, it was enormous pain, it was an excruciating death beyond belief. But somehow in all that, he's still looking out for her. He's forgiving the people who are doing this to him. He's acknowledging to the perpetrator beside him that in the moment you die, you will be with me in paradise.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know if Mary's hearing all of these comments, but if you hear those comments and it's enormous solace in that promise that in the moment I die, I will be with Jesus in paradise. Or even when I am, and I'm just going through the 7 words of the cross.
Right.
But even when I get to a point where I feel forsaken by God, and there are moments in most days when I sort of forget. Just little moments where I'm kind of feeling forsaken. This isn't going well. This is, I'm not really blaming God, but I'm feeling forsaken. And even if you get to a stretch in your life where you do feel God's forgotten me in this period, to somehow find that bedrock trust to when you die, commit your spirit into your Father's hands. In spite of that, I mean, it all happens within hours. And my God, why have you forsaken me? And then into your hands I commit my spirit. And then he says, it is finished. And for a long time I've wondered what that means. And I probably don't know, but for sure. But what it means for me is if I can get to the point that even though I may for stretches feel forsaken, there is still in here a bedrock trust that into my Father's hands I can commit my spirit at the end. Then it is finished. That's what it was all about. To get there, to get that spirit.
Right.
But the point, tying it to what we were talking about before is Mary is seeing something pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's awful and horrific and heroic and incredible all in one.
I love what you just said, Dave. That's powerful. Anybody on screen want to say anything?
This is Art. I could say something. With regards to death, I'm just wondering as I'm listening and thinking about it, is it possible that death could be unjustified? And what I'm really thinking about is not the person that has passed away, but the people that remain. And and what's the pity that should remain with those folks? And so is it a justifiable death for this? And I don't mean to bring this individual up, Chris, that you began the prayer about, a 40-year-old who died of a heart attack, who now left a widow behind, and he went straight to heaven. We got that, but what about her? And I'm not sure what to do with that.
Well, yeah, I would say I'm not sure what to do with it either. But I think that's where, for me, with Joanne, it's understandable. um, 94 years, she was ready to go. With Linda, I have a little bit of issue because Al and the family wanted her to be with her for years, them for years. Judy wanted more years, but Judy said, you know what? I'm okay with this. My mother died at age 64. My dad died at 53. I've outlived them both, and I feel very undeserving of that. But were it not for this, I'll be honest, were it not for this church family, um, it's not that I'm going to have all my questions answered, but it is that I'm going to trust even though I don't know it all. I don't know if that helps or hinders you, but that's my answer.
No, of course it does. But again, maybe it's unjustified. And maybe we need to understand that.
Yeah.
Just recognize that, I mean, that, life and death comes and goes. But to say that it came at the right time, when someone's starting a family and has two young children, and whether it's the wife or the husband that, mother or father that passed away, I'm sorry, it's very difficult and perhaps even horrific. And the one that passes, we recognize that they have eternal life. But then do the people who are left behind have finite poor life? Yeah, I couldn't come up with the right word, but difficult life.
No, I totally agree with you, Art. To me, we live in a world where people are fragile, and some people have long life and some people do not. And but personally, I do not know that God says, you get this many days and then you're going to be gone, and you get this many days. And I know poetically in Psalms it talks about your days are numbered, but I really think that, my husband died because of gravity, not because God said, okay, this is the day you need to die so that, and because even if it's a lesson in whatever, in the fragility of life, it's not a lesson. Why did my kids need to learn that lesson? Why did I need to learn that lesson rather than, my dad got to have, his wife his whole life or whatever, it's just, no, it's not fair. And I don't think, certainly justified is not a word I would use. I just think for me, I had to just come down to, we live in a world where people are fragile. It makes us have to value life. Because I have the same kind of problem with, tsunamis that kill thousands of people. I just have a hard time saying, God's teaching us a lesson that I think we live, but given that we live in this world, now what do we think about God, and what do we think about what happens? And that's one of my least favorite phrases is, God is in control. And I know a lot of people will probably take issue with me, but because it just depends on what you mean by that when you say God is in control. Some people take it so literally that, and I've read books that had it. I literally threw a book across the room that had it in it. But because she was saying, God is so in control that he's in control. He wanted me to get my first divorce because I need to learn from that, or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you are lost. And he's a popular Christian speaker, and I just threw that book on. But to me, that's, when you talk about God is in control, like Laconia was talking about it, like come judgment, God is in control. That's a different thing than God is directing every little thing that happens on earth, like we're
down to the parking space.
down to the parking space. So that's why I don't like that phrase.
It's easy to put failure on God rather than taking responsibility.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
When God is in control, makes him an ogre a whole lot of the time.
It does, and it makes you not responsible for what you do because God is in control somehow, and that there's nothing in the Bible that reflects that at all. If you read the thing, people live, people die, things
All
happen, and all that, and then you have God, but those people they just took that phrase and ran with it and didn't ever look at what is actually happening,
Well,
sorry.
And people misuse that phrase about, there's a lesson to be learned in this. Well, in retrospect, no matter what the event was.
Yeah.
There is a lesson to
Yes,
be learned in it,
Sure.
which is
Absolutely.
different than saying, God gave you this
Yes,
to learn this
to
lesson.
learn that lesson,
I-
exactly.
Those things get conflated and we have
I'm-
to really watch for that.
I'm with you on that,
Mhm.
100%.
Mhm.
Viral, and then we're gonna close up. I have some things to say at the end.
No, I was just gonna quickly say that only time that I have used that God is in control is when things are literally out of my control. Like, for example, if I apply for a job, now it's out of my hand, you know,
Right,
God is
right,
in control.
exactly.
If I get a call back or not, you know, but, other than that, like, I don't see that phrase as an excuse to, well, you know, I don't have to try as hard.
Right,
Because God is in control, God already knows I'm gonna get a C, so I'm not gonna study, like,
Right,
that's just.
exactly.
Young people do that.
yes, yeah.
Well, number one, this is the third week. I'm ending. I've enjoyed it. I'm glad Brother Paul's or somebody else is gonna come back next week.
We're gonna talk about jokes. How to love when humor gets out of control and is demeaning.
That's true.
That's
That's
it.
true.
Mhm.
Oh, that's gonna be next week?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to end with 3 quotes. And people online, you've got them, and I'll make sure that everybody else gets them. I'll have them emailed to you. Alice Walker said this in 1990 in the magazine Common Boundary. Storytelling, has a real function. The process of the storytelling is itself a healing process. Partly because you have someone there who is taking the time to tell you a story that has great meaning to them. They're taking the time to do this because your life could use some help, but they don't want to come over and just give advice. They want to give it to you in a form that becomes inseparable from your whole self. That's what stories do. Stories differ from advice in that once you get the story, they become a fabric of your whole soul. That is why they heal you. In the book John Henry by Julius Lester, I love this quote. It says, "Dying ain't what's important. Everybody does that. What matters is how well you do your living." And then the last one is James Stevens in the book by Ruth Sawyer, The Way of the Storyteller. He says, "I've learned that the head does not hear anything until the heart has listened, and what the heart knows today, the head will understand tomorrow." I'm going to leave those with you, and I'm going to say thank you and go to bed.
Sweet dreams, everybody.
I take care.
Thank you, Laconia.
You're welcome.